Hey kids, I'm back. Went with the Arctic camo today. We are expecting snow this weekend, so I'm just getting a jump on it in case I've got to run and depart. Remember, number one, thank you for sending questions. Number two, I am one person with one opinion. You may just totally disagree with me, and that's absolutely fine. I've had a weird little life in photography and around self-publishing. Maybe I can help you. Question number one, what's your stance on money as it pertains to cameras and just life in general? Do you take the you only live once position or you save before you spend position? That's what I love about these question and answers is they come from all over. And I get tired of talking about self-publishing and photography. So this is pretty interesting about money. So when I went to photo school, none of us that went to school and our little gaggle of photojournalism students, no one thought we would ever get rich. In fact, most of us, and I've had this conversation with people I went to school with, I reached back out to them years later and said, hey, did we ever talk about being famous? No. Did we ever talk about being rich? No. Did we ever talk about being known? No. What we did talk about was the idea that people might know our work. The reason I bring that up is for working for Blurb over the last decade, I've been in a lot of art schools around the world. And what I noticed after the arrival of social media was this idea that there would be immediate relevancy, fame, and finances from being a photographer. And one of the questions I always ask in art schools was, if you are a first book author, if you've never published a book before and you get a photo book deal, how many copies of the photo book do you think the publisher will print on your first book? The number one answer I get is 100,000 copies, which is so wildly delusional, it's hard to comprehend. And then when I say, does anybody else have any ideas? The follow-up answers are always higher or more than 100,000. When in reality, if you get 3,000 copies of a book, you're gonna be lucky. A lot of times today, books are done in the 1,500 range. Sometimes even smaller runs are done. So it's kind of crazy. Money, my father wanted me to be an investment banker. He said photography is a wasted career and it's a hobby at best and it's a joke and you're gonna regret it. So he was like a mind reader. I mean, he was a visionary because he was right on every single point. I never really was focused on the money. I remember when I got my job at Kodak in 1997, I think they were paying me, they were gonna pay me $36,000 a year and I thought that was all the money in the world. And my first thought was, I have enough money to donate to people that don't have money. That was my first thought. And I'm no saint, but in the back of my head, I was like, oh, I've got this good job now that pays me, I have benefits and a company car. It's my responsibility as a human to do something for someone else. Again, I'm no saint, but that was my first thought. So I am not wild with my money at all. I am a saver. My wife is a saver, and that has been incredibly beneficial to us. Plus, you realize the older you get, what little matters in life. It is not about, I have no thrill at all buying a new camera. In the last year, I bought a 360 camera, I bought a GoPro, I bought a Fuji X-T4, I bought a Sony ZV-1. What else? I don't get any thrill from that at all. I get a thrill from using it in the field, and I get a thrill from looking at the work that I produce from it. Sometimes, on those rare occasions when I do something right, I save. I'm not a blow-it. I'm not a flashy guy. I'm not a spendy guy. I drive a Dodge 1500 ProMaster. It's a metal box. It's not sexy at all. It's functional, it's practical. That's probably a good representation of my finance. And my wife drives a 11-year-old RAV4 that we bought used, and she loves it. And her bike is 15 years old. It's a rusted, absolute piece of crap. I can't get her to get rid of it. I would spend money on a titanium bike frame. I would spend money on that Priority mountain bike, the pinion gearbox Gates carbon drive. That thing's kind of haunting me. I don't need that bike, so I'm not gonna buy it, but I would. I am also gonna buy a folding canoe. I'm gonna buy a My Canoe, which to me is really, really expensive, but I cannot strap a rigid canoe on the van. First of all, I cannot get it on the roof by myself. And two, I don't want to drive around with a giant canoe on the roof of my van. One, it's gonna get stolen, and two, today we have 55-mile-an-hour winds. I can't drive around with a canoe. I need something to fold in the back. So I'm gonna pay through the nose to get this folding canoe, but I know how much I'm gonna use it and how much I'm gonna enjoy it. So to me, it's worthwhile, and I have the money because I saved my ass off. All right, question number two. Can a mind in this world live without an image of itself? I doubt if a verbal answer exists, but it would be interesting to watch your flow, looking into it. Thank you, and keep disrupting the stagnation. I like that, disrupting the stagnation. It's good. Can a mind in this world exist without an image of itself? Of course. It's called yoga. Yoga was a mental exercise for 2,000 years before it was a physical exercise. Why do you think that is? Because, and I think the guy's name was like Patanjali or something, 3,000 years ago, he wrote this secret code that basically was the riddle, the solving, the solution of the riddle of unlocking this idea that there was a place in the mind that was a tranquil place of clarity. So yes, and that's not about the self. It's just about potentially getting rid of the self. So yes, I do believe that that's possible. And I think that's something that all of us would probably be better off of, because God knows we make enough pictures of ourselves. The selfie thing is like so disheartening and awful. And when I see a selfie stick, I fly into a blind rage, even when I'm holding it. Yeah. Okay. Question number 3. And thanks for sending that question. That was a nice offbeat, different kind of angle here. When doing layouts for magazines, do you set a time limit for completion? For example, with the 3-horse track samples you did, how did you stop working on one and then on to the next? I did my first sample magazine and found myself spinning my wheels until I just said forget it and hit submit. I do thank you for the inspiration, or even to get making a sample magazine through Blurb, of course. Well done. Making a sample and making tests is absolutely critical to the bookmaking process. I see a lot of people drive themselves crazy. Photographers who can't get publishing deals turn to Blurb. They come to me and they say things like, okay, I couldn't get a publishing deal and I'm gonna try Blurb and it better work. And I'm like, I always tell them, don't use Blurb. Don't use anyone right now. If you're coming in angry and accusational and frustrated that you can't get a publishing deal and you think miraculously this other methodology is gonna work, it won't, it never does. Relax, take a vacation, disappear for a year, go shoot something new, and then come back to it with a good mindset. So I don't ever set a time limit. They're set for me because I have so many deadlines for work and so much on my calendar and my to-do list that's outside of YouTube, that's outside of anything to do with me personally. It's all Blurb stuff. Those deadlines are set for me. Those racetrack spreads that you're talking about, I probably spent 10 minutes on each one of those. And I was just spitballing. I was just throwing things on those spreads and looking and saying, does that work? Does it look good? What part of this spread can I then utilize moving forward? I keep a document in Bookright open at all times that I have no intention of printing. And I just use it as a design experimentation document. So every day I'm in there like tinkering with stuff and moving fonts or trying a new font, downloading something, a typeface and importing it and putting it on a spread and seeing how it works. So I just, the time limits and deadlines are set for me. Question number 4. Have you ever taken a photograph that's changed or distorted your worldview and made you go, huh, I never saw that like that, but now I do? Interesting question. I don't know if I've made a photograph that did that. I've certainly had experiences in the field that made me see the world in a different way. I had a kid in Cambodia put an AK-47 to my head in the middle of a park in the middle of the day and asked for 1,500 real. And I was like, no problem. How about 3,000? Here you go. And I did not look at this kid with animosity. I looked at the kid like, that's an entrepreneur. He needs some money. And I'm the only tourist in the immediate area because at that time, this was 96. There were very, very few tourists in Cambodia. So that changed my worldview a little bit. And I told you in the last Q&A, I got detained once, driven out in the desert and dropped off by some authority figures here in the US. That certainly opened my eyes. I got not beaten up, but I got punched a few times by other authority people here in the States that were doing it because they knew they could get away with it. That sort of changed my worldview a little bit. But again, these were not things that I was like, oh, I'm gonna harbor a grudge against you forever. I was like, I sort of got it. I went to public school. Any boy who's been to American public school, who survived PE class and the savagery, the Lord of the Flies savagery that goes down in American PE classes in middle school, especially at the school that I went to, it was a war zone. The rest of this stuff is just water off your back. It's like, whatever. I went through worse in 7th grade, took a beating in PE class. It was way worse than anything that happened. So my worldview changes all the time. I try to change it. I try to have some of the preconceived notions that I think are embedded. For example, right now in my circle of friends, it is taboo to be identified with the Republican Party. Right? If you're a Republican, you are 100% fascist across the board. Now, I don't really identify with the Republican Party, and I think the current Republican leadership is horrible. But I don't draw a line in the sand and say everyone's bad. every policy is bad, whatever, because I can turn and look at the Democratic Party and see plenty of problems over there. So I say to myself, all right, what good is it for us to draw these lines? We should have this dialogue. I got an email yesterday from a friend who says he's a Democrat, but pretty much everything that he sends me is very far right. And I wrote him and said, it's okay to be a Republican. It is. It's okay. Drawing lines in sand, pointing fingers and saying everyone on this side is bad or everyone on this side is good is ridiculous. It got us where we are. So I try to constantly say to myself, am I seeing this the right way? And how is my learned behavior, my education, my environment impacting my ability to see the truth? And I try to get better. Again, I'm a disaster as a human being. So don't do what I do. Don't listen to me. Sign off of this. Go to confession right now. Just confess that you are watching my Q&A on YouTube. That right there. Hail Mary. Whatever you say in confession, I've never been. Howdy, Dan. This is more on the business side of things. My project's subject or idea involves businesses. My plan is to charge a very small fee for my photography services, not in it for the money, but will help for now. I like to shoot. Times are tough, and some may not want to spend their funds on photography, meaning that if I got turned down because of this small fee, I'll have no access to get images for my documentary project. What is the best way to approach a scenario like this? Also, Bronco or Blazer? What's your favorite? Oh, I'm gonna underline that. I like that. Totally out of right field at the end. Smart move. So you're on the business side, you wanna charge a small fee. Some may not want to spend their funds on photography, meaning if I get turned down because of this small fee, I'll have no access to get images for my documentary project. I think paying for images for documentary is a very slippery slope. I would separate that. I would separate your doing work for businesses on one side, make your money, and then go do your documentary work and have no association with those businesses, just go as an individual. Because that gets a little foggy, a little gray in the sense of like, who is this documentary work or is it commercial work? Nobody wants to pay for photography anymore. That started happening with the advent of digital photography. Digital cameras began to undermine the industry immediately. Now, for you tech heads out there or you geeks who love this technology, I'm not talking about the technology. I'm talking about what it did to the mindset of photographers and of clients in particular. Remember, I worked at Kodak from 97 to like 2000. Kodak during that time launched the DCS 520 and the DCS 560. These were $15,000 and $30,000 cameras that you could either get on a Nikon platform or Canon platform. Kodak made the sensors inside. That began to undermine what photography was to the general public and to clients who suddenly looked and said, oh, I don't have to pay for film and processing. All the cost of this material is on the photographer. We can just pass that on to the photographers. They haven't put up a fight, so we'll just push it off to them. Photographers started paying for it. But I was in a studio in Manhattan Beach and I saw a photographer who's a really good catalog fashion photographer. The client was in the other room and said, he did the shoot and the client said, well, that was too easy. Why am I paying you so much? It was fast, I already have what I want. We're gonna renegotiate. And the photographer was like, no, we're not. And the client said, well, okay, well then you have to shoot all this extra stuff for free because we saw how easy it was what you just did. And he said, it's easy because I'm good. I know how to light. I own the studio. I built a viewing room for you. I invested in the technology. Client was like, I don't care. This is over. From that moment on, from the late 90s, the average value of photography just absolutely nosedived. Microstock, royalty-free, wholly owned content. All of those things came into the conversation, further driving the value of photography down. So just getting people to pay for photography now is a nightmare. It's one of the reasons why I walked away. I was like, this just isn't fun anymore. People still do it. Advertising out. I know photographers who are billing 7 figures a year that are advertising in commercial directors and photographers. That's still happening. I personally have absolutely zero interest in ever doing the kind of work that they're doing. But the kind of work that I'm doing, that I like to do, documentary work, there's never been a place for that in America. There's never been a real solid industry on that, and it's really hard to get paid. Okay, aren't I just the bearer of great news? Question number 6. You once mentioned that if you were able to get back to film, you would of course shoot black and white, and besides you would play around with color negative film and avoid slides. Could you elaborate? Yes, I could, and I will. Yeah, we shot transparency back in the day because that was the best way to get color separations for publication. So the newspaper, the magazines, they were making separations from transparency and they looked better than color negative. Then along came developments and advances in color negative and people switch to color negative because less expensive and far more latitude when you're shooting it. It's much easier to shoot color neg than it is transparency, especially on deadline, or especially when you're in the field and things are happening fast. And if you blow in a transparency exposure by half stop, it's gone. You can't save it. And with negative, you can be all over the place. And so negative really took over. Late 90s was when transparency started to go away and negative started to come in. It wasn't like it wasn't there before, but the shift happened. And for me, I'm primarily a black and white photographer. I prefer to shoot black and white, and I would just do that. And if I wanted to shoot some color, I would just shoot color neg in my Hasselblad, and I would avoid transparency. I don't even really like the look of transparency anymore. I used to love it. I loved a good chrome. I mean, looking on a light box at a good positive where you had a good moment, you nailed the exposure, that was a wonderful time in my life, but it's gone, and I prefer the look of negative now. Question number 7. We're flying through this. If you did a round the world bicycle trip and you had to choose, what would you take, your fly fishing gear or more film? Good question. I would not shoot film, I would shoot digital, and I would take my fly fishing equipment. And I would probably take a bunch of stuff that I would end up throwing away because I would get so tired by being overloaded. But the fly rod, I have a little Orvis 7-piece travel fly rod that I love, that I've actually landed some pretty sizable fish on. And it actually casts well. For a 7-piece travel rod, it casts really well. I had a bass on once on that rod. So I was fishing in Texas, Central Texas, a little private stretch of river. No one fishes. I'm throwing a topwater popper. I cast out, right? And I get a little crappie. And I'm like, oh, it's this tiny little crappie. So I'm stripping the line off, got my rod tip way up, and I'm pulling that fish across the surface of this little river just to get it in as quick as possible and let it go. It gets about 5 feet from shore. And the largest bass I have ever seen personally in my life comes up underneath my poor little crappie who doesn't know what's about to hit him and just swallows the entire thing. Now my mom, my 80-year-old mother, is standing next to me 5 feet away watching this whole thing. And she looks down very calmly and looks over at me and goes, it's gonna break that rod. And this bass sucks in my crappie, turns upside down and goes straight down into the weeds. So I'm just standing there at the shoreline. Now I've got the line's been all taken out and it's a stalemate. This bass has gone down deep and is not moving, and it feels like I have a log on the end of this rod. And this 7-piece Orvis rod was bent in a way I have never seen it before or after. And I couldn't do anything. I couldn't move. I just stood there until the bass apparently got bored and came rocketing up to the surface. And literally my mom's still standing where we're both just looking down, and it just spits out this entire fish. Comes out of the water, spits it out. The crappie's still alive, totally fine. I take it off, the bass goes away. I know that fish is still there. I've been back 2-3 times, nothing. And I know it's out there and it's haunting me because when its mouth came up and opened, it looked like a trash can underneath. I thought it was like a Nessie. I thought I was gonna have to like go mano a mano with this thing with my fillet knife and maybe take it out. It was that big. I'd shoot digital and take my fly rod. Question number 8. How do I prevent myself evaluating my work based on others or the snobs may feel about it? You know, I'm really glad someone sent that question in because I feel bad, not super bad. I feel mildly bad for a lot of people who came up in a time when during the share economy, where everything was shared instantly all the time to an audience of untrained people with very little attention span. And so you put your stuff out and it's just this deluge of kind of meaningless feedback, and it can be kind of cruel. And you're getting feedback from a lot of people that don't have training that may or may not know what's good. They're reacting emotionally. They're reacting to things they've seen 10,000 times before. They're trying to categorize. They're trying to pigeonhole. And it's kind of unfair. So my advice is just to turn all of that off and find someone in your immediate vicinity, whether it's a family member or a friend or a mentor, who actually has training enough to know what might be considered good versus bad. And then print your work and show it to this person, either mail it to them or meet with them in person when COVID is done, and just start to build a relationship with someone who can actually help you improve. The rest of it doesn't matter. It's nonsense. It's fake and phony. And I frankly do not care what anyone says. Hey kids, I'm back. I just burned an entire battery in the Atomos and it died. So I'm back. I was talking about how to avoid being judged by other people. Go back to the end of the first segment. I think that's it. I think we're in question 9. Hello, Senor Milner. Gusto saludarte. Non-photography related, what did you learn from traveling to countries like Panama and Peru? So that's a great question. I love Latin America, from Mexico, Guatemala, Peru, Uruguay, Brazil, Panama. I have loved every location that I have been in Latin America. What I've learned, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, first of all, the vast majority of people in Latin America, to me, are like salt of the earth people. You hear a lot of odd things about Mexico here in America with all the heightened political tension that we have going on right now. And you hear these vicious and kind of vile things about Mexican people trying to cross the border. In my experience, the Mexican people are some of the nicest people I have ever met anywhere in the world. They are wonderful. And I would say the same about every country I've been to in Latin America. What I have learned, too, is how different every country is and how many countries are within the countries. So Peru, for example, you have 4 countries in one. You have the cities, you have the deserts, you have the Andes, and you have the Amazon. And they are completely different from one another. You could spend your entire career in just one of those. Panama is very, very similar. The difference between the Atlantic coast and the Pacific coast, you have the Canal Zone, you have places like Casco Viejo, and then you have places like, I forget what the name of that city is on the other side. That's kind of dicey. Cologne, maybe? Something like that. Anyway, the jungle in Panama was unbelievable. Probably the single hottest place I have ever been in my life. And I was in Cambodia. I've been in places like that. I thought Cambodia was hot. Panama was even hotter. So I learned about the history. I learned about American intervention in these countries going way back, which is a whole nother set of can of worms I don't want to open here, but I love everything about Latin America. My wife and I talk about moving to Latin America all the time. I don't know where that would be. It could be Chile, it could be Colombia. I don't know, but I have a sinking suspicion that when COVID is solved and when I'm in my retirement years, whenever that comes, if it ever comes, I will be living in Latin America. Question number 10, what's the difference between a photo essay and a photo story? I don't think there is a difference. I think those are interchangeable words. At least they are in my mind. If there is a difference and I don't know, then someone please illuminate this closed-minded man. All right, question number 11. Hey, Dan, another question if I'm not too late. You often talk about your disdain for van life since most of the YouTube and blog channels out there are only trying to sell you a lifestyle. It's very true. Van life crowd is some of the phoniest, most shameless people I have ever seen in my life. And the stories that have come out about some of these folks being busted for living this sort of van life on YouTube, and then in reality they're living this completely other life, it just speaks to what we've done, like what YouTube is about in general. The same stuff happens in photography, it happens in tech, it happens in every genre of YouTube. But I think van lifers and sailors, oddly enough, people in the sailing community are shameless too in terms of faking stuff that didn't happen to get views and also selling softcore. I mean, holy cow, van lifers are really guilty with selling their channels through softcore. It's embarrassing. Okay, let's get back to the question. Which resources were actually helpful for you when researching and building your van? So it was very simple for me. I initially wanted a 4-wheel drive Sprinter van. The cost immediately eliminated that. And 2, the availability at the time immediately eliminated that. And 3, the fact that the van was rear-wheel drive eliminated it as well because I live in New Mexico where it snows. Sprinters with rear wheel were not great in the snow. They were impossible to get and they were double the price of what I wanted to spend. So immediately the only other option when I bought my van was the Dodge ProMaster. There were things about the Dodge I liked and didn't like. It was a Dodge. I knew that I was probably going to have some minor issues with it the whole time I've owned it. That was my prior experience with Dodge. The engine and transmission were super solid. I looked at how long they'd been around, how easy they were to service, how easy they were to maintain, and the Dodge was a dream compared to the Sprinter. The Sprinter was far more expensive, far more complicated, and in some cases would require a certified Sprinter technician to do things to the van, and those are really hard to find where I live. Secondly, the Dodge was front-wheel drive, and I knew if I put KO2s on there, I would have great tires, and with front-wheel drive in the snow with a good tire, you can go pretty much anywhere. Last weekend was a good example. I drove through all kinds of mud and snow in the van, and it was rock solid, even though I was spinning. I was able to get through everything. Second, lastly, or maybe not even lastly, but the Dodge is a square. So in the back of the Dodge, the actual box section of the van is square, which means I can sleep perpendicular in the van. I just fit. With a Sprinter, which tapers, I had to sleep at an angle, and I did not want to do that because my wife is with me all the time and we sleep right next to each other, obviously, and I wanted to be able to sleep like this. Also, the Dodge was incredibly affordable, and finally, the key to my system, my van, is the kit on the inside, which was made by a company called Wayfarer out of Colorado Springs. And I met the folks at Wayfarer. A friend of mine sent me an email and said, "Do you know about these people?" I looked at their internal van kit and I was sold immediately for a couple of reasons. One, cost effective. Two, installed the entire thing, took 3 hours to install. The floor, the roof, the insulation, the galley area, the storage, the sleeping platform, it's all modular. It bolts in and out. I can remove everything if I want to and turn it back into a cargo van. And then I can immediately put everything back in, bolt it down. If I don't want something for a particular trip, if I don't need the galley, I unbolt it and take it out. If I don't need the storage, I unbolt it and take it out. My bikes fit underneath it perfectly. Everything fits inside with nothing on the outside. And in 3 hours after buying the van, I kid you not, 3 hours after signing the paperwork, the inside of my van was completely kitted and I was camping in the van that night. All these people who spend years doing build outs or building like mahogany cabinets, I have seen some of the most beautiful vans. I mean, I was in a $150,000 Winnebago Revell I ran a 30K down on the border in Texas, and the inside of this van was like an art museum. It was absolutely gorgeous, but it was a $150,000 van. I'm not gonna spend that. I could get ripped, it could stolen, I could get hit, I leave it in a parking lot, whatever. They're gorgeous, and if someone gave me a Winnebago Revell, I would take it. They're amazing and they're four-wheel drive. My van was even brand new, it was far less expensive, and it's so practical and simple and easy in comparison. Last weekend up in Colorado, I ran into somebody in a four-wheel drive, lifted, dually sportsmobile Sprinter, which I'm guessing is close to 200 grand. And again, it was gorgeous, but it's massive. It doesn't fit in a parking spot, nothing. My van, I drive around town. The roads in Santa Fe are super narrow. This thing, I park it everywhere I can go. Trader Joe's parking lot here is the most dangerous place I've ever been in my life. And I can drive it there and park it in a regular spot and it's totally fine. Great question. I love van questions because it's a blast. Question 12 and then we're done. Your thoughts on a potential reclassification of Santa Fe by the Office of Management and Budget? So I'm not going to end with this question. I'm going to do one more because this is an odd one. It's about Santa Fe in particular. They're thinking about reclassifying the city as from a metropolitan to a micropolitan. Long overdue readjustment of statistical definitions to account for population growth trends in the last century. First step down a slippery slope towards less federal dollars, negative impacts to drawing business to the area due to small-time stigma. So for those of you who don't know about Santa Fe or New Mexico in general, this is a very unique place. With a unique history and a unique culture, there is no other place like it in America. It is one of my favorite places I've ever been in the world. I have a hard time even wrapping my head around how crazy this place is in a good way. But there is also a history here of a lot of issues. We have a drug trafficking problem, we have an education problem, we have a crime and violence problem, we have a corruption issue. A lot of big industry companies have dabbled with the idea of moving to New Mexico in the past and have skipped that, have gone elsewhere. One of the quotes I remember was one of these companies saying they had never seen cronyism like this anywhere in the United States. When they came here and were going to invest, they realized the level of corruption at the high levels of politics was so bad, they said, we can't bring our investments here. So it's tricky. The average age in Santa Fe is going up, and the city is doing what they can to try to avoid becoming a retirement center. Kids are leaving because there's very few opportunities outside of tourism. And there's things like we have fiber internet, but it's like one little section of one little street. We're way behind in terms of technology, which is odd because in the 80s, Santa Fe was called the Info Mesa. It was one of the first big tech areas in America. A lot of people don't know that. Then it shifted over to Northern California, but this was a tech area. But they never captured it. So we have limited resources, we have limited water, we have 4 seasons, so we have a hard winter, we have a hot summer. There's a lot of things here. Tourism is the lifeblood. I'm not exactly sure what the reclassification will do, but less federal dollars here is a problem because we are the second poorest state in America and we need every federal dollar we can get. And so that's not good. Now, COVID has changed everything. This is the wrinkle that I would throw in here, is the exodus from LA, San Francisco, New York, Austin. Austin's been ruined basically by people coming from LA and New York and the tech, all these cities who attract these big tech people. You better have a good hard look at what that means, because they're going to destroy what you have. I guarantee it. They've destroyed every community they've ever been in. Miami, you're on deck. Austin, you're on deck. So I'd be very curious. I don't even go back to Austin now. I went to school there. I knew it when it was a town, and I go back now and it reminds me too much of LA. I don't really like it much anymore because, again, I'm jaded. I knew it back when it was a small town, and now I go and it feels like LA to me, a little mini LA. So COVID, the exodus, people are coming here, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. The good part is that it brings revenue to the state. You know, Netflix, huge investment down in Albuquerque. The bad news is the kind of people who can afford to go on an exodus are often not the folks that you want in your community. They tend to come in, drive up prices. Affordable housing in Santa Fe is a huge problem. Rents here right now, people are gouging because of the exodus. People are coming here and overpaying for everything. And these are people who tend to come and try to change the rules to their own advantage. They build gates, they build fences, they try to keep people out. They want to take over public land and make it private. It's a very precarious time, I feel, for the city of Santa Fe. And I think it's a precarious time for New Mexico in general. We need really good leadership, and we need to be talking about these issues publicly and make sure that we do not allow this to happen, that wealth comes in and really decimates what's left of the local community, because the locals in New Mexico are what make it what it is. The fact that we have all these races of people, that we have all these groups that are so distinctive, they are the ones that power the flavor of why this place is so magical. We have to protect that. Okay, the last question. All right, we're gonna do, this is the question 13, and this is a photo one, because I know you geeks are here for photo stuff, not about Santa Fe and about whatever else we were talking about. You have spoken in the past about doing work for yourself, only doing one copy of a book and not selling your work. So I was curious, albeit morbidly, especially after watching the Vivian Maier documentary. How would you feel about your work being published posthumously, both from the profit side, someone else profiting from your work, and from the artistic side, other people judging your work when you never put it out there to be judged? If someone found your stuff and wanted to publish it, then found this Q&A video, what would you say to them? This is not counting your family members. Wow. I have no idea. I've never thought about that. I don't think I would really care. I mean, look, I've always looked at being a documentary photographer. Your primary responsibility is to record and to save. Record and preserve. Because maybe at some point down the line, someone will find something that you did and say, oh, that's what we needed to see. You know, what did the border area in Tijuana look like in 1996 where the fence hits the Pacific Ocean? Well, I have a bunch of 6x9 black and white negatives of that. Maybe that's helpful to someone at some point in time. And if it is, and it's used and published and people love it or hate it, great. That's what it's about. It's about being part of the dialogue and the discourse and the vernacular of whatever that time was or that moment was. So I think that would be totally fine. My family does not care about my photography in the slightest. They would never preserve any of my work. My negatives will all disappear or be thrown away the second I'm dead. My wife would keep them at least for a while, but when she's gone, no, my work's gone. There's no archive that's gonna take it. I was never able to amass enough photography to really interest an archive, so I don't see that happening. And again, my family, I think my family still thinks I'm a photographer. And I haven't been a photographer in 11 years, but I think they still think I am. That tells you how little my profession comes up in my family. It has never come up. I think I've told you this many times before. I never had a conversation about my job with my parents after I became a photographer. My father would cut clippings out of the newspaper when a photographer was killed somewhere around the world, and he would handwrite in his chicken scratch, probably deserved it, and then he would take the time to mail that to me. So that tells you my relationship with my career and my family. I never looked for that, I never needed it. But hey, if someone finds my stuff after I'm dead and finds a use for it, right on, future person, kid living in a pod. That's it, I gotta stop. I gotta get on started with this blurb film I gotta do, and I have no idea how to do it. I'm kind of terrified and I'm procrastinating a little bit, which is not me, but I've gotta just start throwing stuff on the board. Thank you for the questions, and remember, I'm one person with one point of view. You might totally disagree with me, but I appreciate you sending stuff in. I think I'm almost through all the questions, so I appreciate it, and I will see you next time.